We got some backup, so we got it going. So
Watch the stairs are steep. It's a little musty up here. All this rain we've been getting.
oh,
Yeah, Brown was in here actually the night she was last seen alive.
Really?
that's what they say.
Yeah, from what I understand, the locals said that they lured her over here because it was her birthday, or her birthday was coming up, and they brought her up here and saw a show, went and ate, and then they stopped at the Silver Moon, grabbed some beers, left town, and that was the last time anybody saw her live.
Oh.
Other than the people who did her in.
Now, what's the official name of this place?
Ralston Opera House.
The Ralston Opera House.
Yeah. Built in 1900 in preparation for the railroad that was coming through in 1902, and that's when they did their first show up here, was in 1902. Seats 200, and yeah, this was a booming town when Tulsa was a railroad stop. But it was a whiskey town. There were 13 saloons on Main Street. Started as a trading post down the river about 1887, 1889, something in that range. Obviously, there was no booze allowed in the Osage at all, so anybody across the river. And so it grew from there, and then by 1894, it had grown enough that it actually became a town. And the town fought itself the whole time. You had half the town wanted to be proper and respectable, and the other half that just wanted to sell booze and, you know, at least the records here aren't real complete, but we do know Stan Laurel from Laurel and Hardy played here, Houdini played here, Buster Keaton played here, Lily Langtry came a couple times, and there were several others that were quite famous in their day, but nobody would recognize today. But a lot of the silent movie actors and actresses still had one foot in vaudeville, and they'd spend time in Hollywood, and then they would run the circuit. And there was a circuit that used to run from Denver down into San Antonio, and it always came through here. And it'd be anything from one night shows to, you know, larger troops that would stay for a week or whatever. Let me raise the curtain so you guys can see the stage. Yeah, the curtains were canvas on wood. They didn't roll up like modern curtains. They had to be lifted intact. And that's why there's that big high section up there for all the various backdrops, so you can raise and lower them. You guys can come up those steps in the front. All the backdrop we control from up there. Off of that ledge there, the different ropes and stuff you could do. There's a double doorway in the back with a stairway. Originally it was wooden stairs, and when the troops would come through, they'd load all their gear onto wagons and bring it up here and bring it up the back for whatever show they were going to be doing. They did any kind of entertainment you can imagine. If it made a buck, they did it. Including, they'd even put boxing rings up here, and they had semi-professional boxing and wrestling matches. And
That's awesome.
And they originally had wooden chairs in here. And I think it was 1908. A lot of times the troops quit traveling in the winter. And the Harry brothers that owned this, the same family owned it for 85 years. And they tried to figure out how you could make a buck during the winter months. So they got the Montgomery Ward catalog out and ordered 10 pair of roller skates out of Chicago, put it ad on paper. I got a copy of the ad on the wall. And you could come up here and roller skate for 10 cents for 2 hours. And they had 150 people show up, and all they had was 10 pair of roller skates. But I guess they did that quite for several years. They put these chairs in when they started doing silent movies, which was right around 1911. And there's a whole nother room up above this section. There's a big giant attic storage space. And you can see the old cameras if you kind of block out that light over there. The old film projector is up there. And you went up a wood ladder across that, through the attic, and you dropped down into it. And the guy would run the reel. Of course, it was silent movies. Mm. And of course, and I know the poor guy that ran that had to like die of heat stroke up there. And then you had the accompanying piano that, you know, they would play whatever score that went, music that went with the deals. There are several ghost stories wrapped around the place. One of them is, there was a gentleman that bought this property in '85 and started restoring it. His name is Bill Heiser, and you know, he bought it from the last of the family. And her name was Helen, and there's a picture of her over on the wall there, her and her father. And she operated it until her health just got so bad she couldn't do it. And you know, of course, the town was already, you know, significantly less than it had been back in its heyday. Mm-hmm. But the store downstairs was originally Harry Brothers Hardware and Mercantile, and they basically sold anything but food. You know, everything from farm implements to shoes and clothing, and it eventually morphed finally into a hardware store. And when Heiser bought it, he got it added to the National Historic Register, and he worked on it up until about '94, I think. Got about 90% restored, had these seats recovered, rewired it, several other good things he had done. But did a couple shows, sold those out, had the building next door, was going to put in a restaurant so you could eat and see a show, and then he had a heart attack and dropped dead. Then it went up for sale. Actually, it went up for taxes because nobody was paying attention. He was leasing the space downstairs actually to a Denoya. And he had an antique deal down there. And he wasn't aware the taxes weren't being paid. So after a couple of years, it went up for tax auction. And an eccentric lady out of Texas named Isabella bought it for, you know, a few $100s actually. And she ended up locking that guy out and taking all his stuff, which I guess was technically legal because you buy a property for taxes, you get everything that's in it. Wasn't morally correct, but you know, legally, I don't think there was a lot the guy could do. She, you know, I'm not a psychologist, but she was kind of a paranoid schizophrenic. And she was, depending on what day you met her, in fact, I met a guy today that had been here back in the day, that he had stopped across the road taking pictures of the buildings, and she came out and chased him off with a hammer. Whoa. Talked to another family where they, a husband and wife, their son and daughter, and they had come up and the front door was open, and she used to have an old dog she would tie out up front, and they knocked and yelled and nothing. They kind of walked around the building, and they came to the back door downstairs. And he said his 14-year-old daughter stepped up there and like looking in the door. He said this crazy lady with long gray hair and a butcher knife like leaps out, "Hey, trying to steal my stuff," and chased him all the way around the building and halfway down the street.
No way.
Yeah. See, I met her several times. She was on the days I met her, she seemed okay, but she lived downstairs for 12 years, even though there's no indoor plumbing. And then she finally passed away from cancer, and of course she had a son and daughter in Texas who came up and took anything they thought they could make a buck off of. Unfortunately, some of the original stuff, like the old original cash register and the old brass scales and stuff like that. But it was their right. I mean, they inherited the property. The old lady was a hoarder of the 11th degree, and she had brought all kinds of stuff into the building, and just, you had little paths downstairs that you could get through. Up here, she couldn't really navigate the stairs, so she turned the electricity off and just left this to sit. And she didn't do any maintenance. The roof started leaking again. The plaster's coming off the walls. Floor's damaged. The original piano got damaged. Electrical outlet shorted out. And it was boarded up for 6 years after she died. And then, of course, the local, you got a property that nobody's actually protecting, and people broke in and ransacked what was left. And so by the time we acquired the property, it had been close to 20 years of neglect. If it hadn't been for Heiser restoring it when he did, it wouldn't be here today. It would have fallen down. But anyway, we acquired it about 4.5 years ago now, I think. And we've been slowly but surely trying to restore it. And during that time frame, I had a lot of people tell me of spooky stuff that supposedly went on around here. And I had a gentleman, he passed away a couple years ago. It was actually that guy in that picture up there with the camo hat. He was helping me in here. And we had several volunteers that come up initially. It starts off when you start a project like this, you have a lot of volunteers and it drops off pretty quickly. But I had a gentleman and his daughter, and we were downstairs. We had cleaned out most of the junk, and we were working downstairs at the back over here. And as I said, the last lady of the family who owned the property, her name was Helen Bullock, and she had diabetes, and she had lost her left leg below the knee. And I remember coming in here in the late 70s when she still had the hardware store. We'd buy BBs or 22 bullets or whatever the kids do. And she's kind of spooky. She's old spinster. She never married. She's kind of tall for a woman. But the spookiest part was that leg. When she would walk, she would drag the leg, and you'd hear it drag. Then she'd kick it out, and it would thump.
Yeah.
And your kid's in an old building, with this lady, and you're like, holy crap, And but she really was a sweetheart. But anyway, we're working downstairs, and there's no insulation in the floor here, even though it's 2x12s. But if I do that, you hear it perfectly fine downstairs. And starting at that corner over there, we started hearing drag, thump, drag, thump. At that time windows were broken out in here, and just kind of patched.
Yeah.
And my first thought was, something's got in up there. Possum, a raccoon, cat, whatever. Something's up there dragging something around. Mm-hmm. So I told the girl, I said, go up there and see what's going on. She wasn't too thrilled about the idea. So she gets up here, gets about to the top of the stairs, hears the drag thump and screams and runs back downstairs. But it stops, so we go back to work.
Yeah.
About 10 minutes later, starts up again, except this time it's over on this side of the building. It starts coming up through there. She refused to come up, so I told her dad, I said, we'll go up there with her. And he wasn't too thrilled about the idea either, but they came up, again, made it to the top of the stairs, hear drag thump, and he screamed like a little 10-year-old girl, and they both ran back downstairs. But again, it stopped. And just so you know, I'm not a huge believer in the ghost thing. I got an open mind, but I always tend to believe that there's actual, a real explanation. I've been places where I've let my mind run away. The Great Horse Cemetery was one. But anyway, stopped again. We went back to work. Then we hear it a third time. But this time it's up here like in the stage area. And so I said, okay, we're all going to go up. Because they kind of refused to come up by themselves anyway. So we come up, turned on all the lights, walked all over it, didn't see anything, went down the stairs, went through the front door, and no sooner we stepped through the door, it starts up again. So I'm like, okay, we're going back up. So we come back up, and this time I even went up in the attic. We're laying down on the floor, looking under the chairs, not finding anything. I said, well, but if it's an animal, obviously it's hiding when we're here. So I said, we'll sit down in these front chairs up here, and we'll be real quiet and won't move. And whatever it is, it'll come out. So we sat there, seemed like 30 minutes. I'm sure it wasn't more than 5. And eventually, nothing. So well, let's get back to work. So we go down the stairs, get back over here, starts up again. I said, well, if it's Helen and she's walking around up there, she's more than welcome to walk all over it. Lasted about another 15 minutes, and we never heard it again. That's one of my personal experiences that, Now, I painted all this stuff on the walls, and I did that not this last winter, the winter before, in the fall and winter. And so I was up here quite a bit late at night. And, you get that creepy feeling. Of course, you're in an old building. It's about 11:30 at night, and you get that feeling, in the back of your neck that, something's staring at you, and you turn around and there's nothing there. But again, you know how the mind can work, when you're in a certain scenario, it runs away. One thing that we have had that several people have noticed, and it's kind of unique, is, and I brought it up to the gentleman today who was telling me about the hammer. If Isabel is haunting anywhere, it would be here. But we've had a real problem with keeping hammers. And everybody's commented on it. I can't tell you how many hammers we brought in here that have disappeared And then occasionally we'll find them in weird places. We were cleaning this out actually this spring, and a friend of mine was cleaning out these. There are 2 little rooms in each corner. Each of them have were little dressing rooms, and there was we had some old Halloween decorations and stuff up there, so we're pulling all that out of there. And he found 3 hammers back in the far corner, hidden in there, and we're like, how did these hammers end up here? And strangely, we brought the hammers downstairs, we put them on our back workbench, and they've all disappeared again. So, yeah, we've just given up trying to keep a hammer. You know, they just walk off. And we've had the traditional bumps, bangs, pictures knocked off the walls. The front doorbell down there, I've had several people comment that they hear that door open and that bell will ding, and there's never anybody there. That gentleman actually right there, he was up working one night, and 3 times he said he was working at the back, and he'd hear the ding, and he'd, you know, hello, and he'd walk up there, and there would be nobody there. He swore the place was haunted, but
Isabella was the one with the long white hair.
long, yeah,
Yeah, long white hair.
yeah. Well, a little bit of gray in it, but it turned mostly white. Yeah, she fit the profile of a, you know, something along those lines. Now, the most famous of the ghost stories is an incident that occurred, and I pieced this back together from a variety of accounts, some a little bit in the newspapers, of a love triangle that occurred. And Helen was aware of this story as well. And I talked to some of her family about it, and they've helped fill in some pieces. But supposedly it was right around 1916. And there was a young married couple here, been married about a month, and they came, there was a troop that came through with the fairly well known in his day singer actor, and they were going to be here for a week. And so he brought his new bride up here to see the show. And I guess it was all the rage and everybody loved it. And, you know, he always ended the show with a song, and he was an accomplished singer. And his wife thoroughly enjoyed the show, and they left. And then the next night, you know, she asked her husband if it would be okay if she went back and watched the show again. And he said, yeah, I got no problem. I don't want to go, but if you want to go ahead. So she came back up for a second view of the show. And after the show ended, she came back up and went backstage and struck up a conversation with the actor. And I guess they kind of hit it off. And so the remainder of the week, she started making excuses to her husband. I'm going to go visit my sister. I'm going to go visit my mother or whatever. But she was secretly coming back up here for the show and then meeting with the actor afterwards. I guess kind of like the Hollywood fixation of, you know, actors today, you know, women throwing themselves at him. But she obviously was heavily enamored with him. And toward the end of their run, one of his friends approached him and said, hey, you know, did you know that your wife was going up there and every night to that show, and that somebody saw her on the roof with the lead actor? And if you go up into the attic space, there's actually a little door down there at the end, and you can open it and you can get up on the roof. The building's really 4 stories tall, even though it's technically a 2-story building. It's 41 feet just to the corner of the stone over there. And he would get on the roof in the evening and get the cooler breeze and watch the traffic down on the street. And supposedly she had been seen up there with him. So he decides to check it out. And so it's the final night of the show. And his wife again makes an excuse that she has to go somewhere. And he waits in about 20-30 minutes after she leaves, and then he comes up here, comes in right before the show starts and sits in the back, and his wife's sitting up here in the front. And as soon as the show ends, he sees her get up and right in the back, and he waits a bit, and she doesn't come back. So he goes backstage, and the stagehands are, you know, sweeping up, and they're starting to pack their gear. And he asked, you know, if they'd seen his wife, and they just pointed up to the roof. So he climbed up the deal, went through the attic, and got out on the roof, and supposedly caught him in an embrace over the corner of the building. And of course, this is 1916. You didn't do stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know? And then a fight ensues. And according to the official report, it was ruled as a suicide, that she had jumped from the corner of that building and landed on the old sandstone sidewalk and died due to shame. A lot of people said it really wasn't that. It was really the guys were fighting and she got up there and tried to break them up and got knocked off the roof. But regardless, she fell from the roof and died. The troop, of course, was already packing up. They packed up, skedaddled out of town. The husband went into a funk, became a recluse and a drunk, and then eventually all the people see him just staggering up and down the street, barely taking care of himself, just staying drunk all the time. His friends tried everything to get him snap out of it. He wouldn't. And this lasts for almost a year. And then word comes that the troop is returning. So, strangely, the husband suddenly snaps out of it, gets himself cleaned up, go get shave, haircut, gets him a new suit, starts interacting with his friends again, and tells them he's done, he's over it, he's moving on, and to prove it, he'll go with them opening night of the show. They're a little suspicious, but they agree, and they come up for the opening night of the show, and he sat front row center, so one of those two seats right there, and his friend sat behind him. And the show goes on. Same, obviously the same actors performing, and they're watching him closely. But he seems to be fine. He laughs when he should laugh, claps when he should clap. And as the actor's finishing up his final song, he jumped up and started climbing onto the stage. Well, his friends tried to stop him, but they had to come around the seats, and they weren't quite fast enough. He gets up there, and then there's two versions of the story. One is he pulled a knife and started slashing at the actor's face and throat and chest. And the other one is that he pulled out a vial and threw it, some type of acid, and threw it in the guy's face. Regardless, either way, the guy wasn't in good shape. He falls screaming to the stage. His friends get up there, and he pulls another vial, drinks it, some kind of poison, and he dies a few minutes later. I did find what I'm pretty sure is his wife's grave out at the old cemetery on the hill, and it's off by itself way in the northeast corner. I could not find his grave, but a lot of those graves up there were vandalized through the years. They kind of quit using that in the 20s. And he may have just had a simple wooden marker that rotted away too. But it doesn't appear that he was actually buried next to her, I can tell you that. We did have some ghost hunters that came up here, and a lady did say she found the newspaper article that talked about his suicide and that he was buried in the cemetery, but didn't give, obviously they don't give plot numbers or anything in there. Anyway, the troop cuts their deal short. They book up, next train comes through, they're out of here. Well, the actor, everybody thought he was going to die, and they taken him down to the local doctor, and he eventually recovered, but obviously his acting career was over. He was physically disfigured, his singing voice was gone, and according to legend, the Harry brothers took him on as a stagehand, and they let him live in the attic space up there. And people reported, they'd still see him out on the roof in the evenings or looking out the windows. Really? He kept very seclusive and typically wore either a large brim hat or some kind of hood deal to hide his face. And that went on up until they really kind of closed this down in 41 when World War II started. It really went into serious decline when the Depression hit, and then it was just used for local stuff. But before that even occurred, though, the guy just disappeared one day, and nobody knew what happened to him. They assumed he'd left or possibly died somewhere and whatever.
I have to run out and grab my second battery.
Okay. You want me to wait?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
It'll just take a couple of
World War II. Probably starting somewhere in the 50s, I guess. And then, this was basically boarded up. They didn't use it anymore. In fact, there were people born and raised here after World War II that didn't even know this opera house was here, because it just, just the top of another old building in a little dying town. And but people started reporting sightings, ranging from a figure on the roof to a figure looking out the windows in the front and in the back, and it was always at dusk. At least all the stories I've heard, it was at dusk. And then there were reported sightings occasionally of a male and female figure, sometimes seen on the roof. And I heard all these stories, and I kind of put it together into a little, flow. And so I heard all of that. And there was a lady, she was a Harry, and she had been a young girl, and Helen, that had owned it, was her great aunt, and she would work up here in the summers. And her great aunt, and I'll show it to you when we go downstairs, there's a section of the old sidewalk is still there. You notice there's the brick stuff that was put in during the Depression, the WPA teams, but part of the old original sidewalk is there, and there's several stones over there that are cracked and sunken. And Helen told her, don't stand on those stones, they're the unlucky stones. And she asked her aunt, why they call the unlucky stones, and she said, well, I don't know, my mother always told me that, so I just listened to what she said. Helen would have been about 10 when the events occurred in 1916, so I'm sure they didn't tell a young 10-year-old girl, some lady jumped to her death over there. So, and she had never heard the whole story of, what was going on, so a little bit of circumstantial evidence to kind of tie it together, because we looked up, if you come off the corner of that building, that's exactly where you would have landed. And that sandstone, the force of a body dropping 40 plus feet, and it's only that thick, would have probably cracked it. So I usually wait to tell people that until they're standing on them. You're standing on the unlucky stones. But personally, I've told this story to obviously a lot of people, ranging from young kids to adults. You notice the old soda machine that's out front there. During the Rona, it was still working, and we had 50-cent sodas in there. And there's a lady that lives down the road. Her grandchildren were visiting. She had like a little girl, 3 little boys, and they had come up here, and I told them the story. And about at that time we didn't have those boards over the window. The glass was still in there, and I told the story about people looking out the window. Well, that night they came down right at dusk to get some sodas out of the machine. They were on their bikes like little kids are. And I guess one of them tilts his soda back to take a drink and swears that there was a guy standing in that window looking down at him.
Wow.
And he freaked. Of course, they all freaked then. They freaked them so bad they left their bikes and ran home and didn't come back till the next day to get their bikes. Of course, again, it's young children. They just heard a spooky story, a few hours before. Probably a little bit more plausible is this alley behind here used to be a street. There used to be a blacksmith shop back there and a lumber yard, but it's years ago. And like I said, I would be up here a lot of times at night working on stuff, and the glass is still back there. And there's a lady that lives. In fact, it was that gentleman's husband. He was her husband, and her young boy was quite small, and she would bring him down that alley in a stroller and take him for a walk, in the evenings when it was cool. And I was out back working one day, and she said, "So you're still working up here in the evenings, huh?" And I said, "No, I haven't been up there in a week." And she goes, "Well, I saw you up there night before last and last night." And I said, "If you saw something, it wasn't me." And she goes, "No, I saw you right in that window over here as we're going down the alley, and I waved at you, and you didn't wave back." And I said, "I'm telling you, it wasn't me. It's probably a shadow or something, coming through there." She goes, No, it moved. It moved over to the other window when we went by." And she goes, "And the next night, same thing. You're at the window watching us as we went by." I said,
What?
and I'm like, and that's why I told her, she hadn't never heard this story either.
Mm-hmm.
So when I told her story, then that kind of freaked her out. So, but that's probably the most well-known ghost story here. You know, Heiser, if he's occupying the place, he's probably, and I suspect he was, because he spent the last part of his life working on trying to save this thing. So, and, you know, but I have seen no direct evidence, you know, of anything I could attribute to him specifically. Isabella, if there's a poltergeist type one, it definitely would be her. Helen, I think, is the same way. I think she would be happy at anything that we're doing here. We do have one other ghost. I bought it off eBay, believe it or not. I collect historical stuff, and if you guys would like, you can take a quick peek in. We have a lot of cool stuff downstairs. But I came across on eBay a young guy who was selling a coffin plaque. The reason I bought it is because it was tied to, I never can remember the guy's name. When Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, they put his body around all over the country. They traveled from major city to major city. And one of those cities obviously was New York City. Rella, that was his name. He was probably the most famous mortician in New York City. So he was contracted to build a carriage to pick up Lincoln's body, take care of it, transport it down to where it laid in state, where people could visit it. And so he became even more famous after doing that. So everybody in New York City wanted to be buried by this guy. And this guy's great-grandfather had worked for Rella. And one of the guys that he buried had invented an improved dumbwaiter. You know, the old dumbwaiters you could pull up and bring food up and you'd pull it out of the wall. And his dumbwaiter was, if you let go of the rope, it latched and it didn't fall all the way to the ground and smash. And he was obviously very proud of his invention. And it was obviously that his wife was not. He probably spent a small fortune to make this thing, and on the coffin plaque he actually had his patent number. And I looked it up and, you know, found his name and the patent he had gotten for his improved dumbwaiter. And when he died, it was brass about so big. In fact, I've got it downstairs, and it's got two sharp pegs on it. And it was designed, of course, these were wooden coffins in the day, and you hammered it into the coffin. And he wanted it on his coffin when he was buried. Well, they were doing the final preparations for the funeral, and were getting ready to put that plaque on there, and his wife walked in and said, "No, hell no. That ain't going on there." So they took it off and set it on the shelf. And according to this guy, his great-grandfather said that from that day on, every time they came into the funeral home, the plaque was missing. And they would find it in weird places all over the place. This went on for like a month. And finally, Rella told his grandfather, "Get that plaque out of here. I don't care what you do with it. Just get it out of here." So his great-grandfather brought it home, put it in a drawer, and then passed the story down through his family. And for whatever bizarre reason, this guy was selling it. And relative. I bought it because of the historical reference tied to the guy with Lincoln's funeral. So it came in here, but, you know, like I said, I'm not a huge strong believer, but I'm not taking any chances. So I took the thing and nailed it to a piece of wood. And I got it in a little display downstairs. But, you know, while I blame Isabella for the hammer, actually, the hammer incident started that day. That's when the hammer started disappearing.
Really?
Yeah, the plaque can't move, so the guy figured he'd piss me off and move the hammers. So one of the two is responsible, because it obviously can't be the fact that I lay a hammer down and can't remember where the hell I put it. You know, so it can't be that at all. But even I can't misplace that many freaking hammers. But anyway, like I said, there's been several ghost hunter teams up here, ranging from rank amateurs to the one that had all kinds, you know, their equipment for electromagnetic fields, and they're the ones who had all the electronic problems the time they were up here. And there was a husband and wife pair of sensitives that came up here, and I hadn't told them the ghost story. And strangely, she did go back to that corner and said she felt the presence of a young woman there, which had been where she died at that corner. Of course, you know, man, woman, 50-50 shot, young, old, 50-50 shot, you know. But I'll give her the benefit of the doubt because, you know, that was pretty spot on the money and in the right location, you know. So, but I'm sure you guys are probably dying of heat stroke up here right now. So,
Yeah.
thinking, yeah.
I was actually gonna suggest, I'd like to get a shot of the pavement. I also would love to get you guys to enter the bar with Wayne before the sun totally goes, and then maybe we could come back down and look at your plaque.
Sure.
It'll only take a minute to run down there.
Okay. Yeah.
Do that.